What's going on, guys? Jesse from Sled Addicts. So as you can see, if you look around, there's no more snow on the ground. So my sled has been taken apart, put back to stock because it's being sold. And I wanted to take the time after putting on 4,600 kilometers on the machine and just go through things I liked, things I didn't like so much, how I think Ski-Doo can improve, and what I think they really did well on. So the first thing I want to talk about are these new Pilot X skis and the Ras-X front suspension. The new skis have a different keel design. On top of that, the Ras-X is a little bit wider. And what I've noticed is when you're riding in the turns, your inside ski does not want to lift as much and your front end feels way more confident. So that was definitely like the first thing I noticed on the machine. The other thing that helps with that is the R-Motion X rear suspension. So it has an extra, I believe an extra inch on the trailing arm that basically allows the machine to transfer less and keep the weight on the skis, which allows you to have more positive steering. Now, Ski-Doo still cares about the people that like the more transfer, so they still give you the option where you can change that trailing arm to the more transfer position, get not as good steering, but be able to lift the skis a little bit more. So both options are still there for you. Another thing that's awesome for this year is this new 7.8 inch gauge. I've been using it all season. I really like it. Again, the major flaw right now is that for Ontario, the OFSC has not released permission to BRP to have their maps on the gauge on BRP Go. So we can't actually use the maps, but when we were in Quebec, the maps actually worked quite well. And we used that for the whole trip. And Mike, his Garmin, he forgot his track maps for the Garmin, so he didn't have GPS when we were in Quebec, but he used the BRP Go app, and it worked really well for him the whole 4 days of the trip. So the gauge is definitely awesome. I did a whole review on the gauge, so you guys can check that out if you have specific questions about the gauge. But besides that, like, this machine was awesome. A lot of people didn't like this jog dial for the gauge because they felt that it would be hard to use, but I actually find it quite easy to use. The whole reason why they put it under here is so they're trying to get you to not use the gauge while you're riding. Because if you have your hand under here and then you need to hit the brake, you can't get to the brake. So it's really meant to be used only when you're stopped. And when you're riding, you have the control up here that replaces the M&S button to adjust volume for your music as well as to answer an end of phone call. So that's been awesome. We've been using E-Link all year, which is this awesome system right here that allows you to connect your visor plug and then have this clip to you, which is just one cord. So when you get off the machine, you don't have to unplug your visor and the desk cord. It's just one thing. So that's been awesome. Overall, I gotta say that this machine has really impressed me. I put on 4,600 kilometers this year and there were no problems. The only thing I did change is after putting on 144 studs, I found that the front end wasn't biting hard enough because of the rear end traction. So I upped the front end traction to the 8-inch carbides, the Executive Series by BRP, and those worked well. But Mike has been using the 6-inch Bergstrom triple point skegs, and after riding his machine, I think that's going to be the way I go next year. But both are great options for sure. Another thing that a critique of mine on this machine is the placement of this gauge. So Ski-Doo's gauges have always been in that location, and then I've always had my Garmin GPS kind of like up here on my glove box extension. After riding a Polaris Matrix machine with the new 7S gauge, that gauge is kind of in the position of where my GPS would be. And I kind of noticed that that was definitely a better position when riding, because especially if I have my handlebar riser on, this handlebar sits high, so in order for me to see the gauge, I kind of got to look down, versus when you're on the Polaris and you look forward, your gauge is kind of like just below your sight line, so it's much easier to see when you're riding in comparison to the Ski-Doo gauge. The other thing is, we all know, I'm not going to deny it, the Polaris 7S display is definitely a step up from what Ski-Doo's brought with the 7.8 Premium. They're both excellent gauges, but the Polaris, because of its size and also being touchscreen and having the option to control it from the gauge with manual knobs as well as from the handlebar, giving you all those options, make it definitely the superior gauge. But both are still good in their respects, and they're both definitely advances over what those companies had previously. another thing, the last thing I wanted to mention with these new skis is that you have these kind of spacers here, and you can adjust that. So you can make your ski stance wide, you can make it narrow, or you can have it neutral. So when I originally got the machine, I had it wide, and then I put it to neutral, and I kind of like neutral a little bit better. Wide was a little overkill for me. But yeah, so it gives you that option. So like if you want to go off trail, even though most people with a Renegade X-RS aren't going off trail, if you choose to, and you put those skis in the narrow stance, you might have a little bit of an advantage in the deep snow. And then when you get back on the trail, or the next day you go on the trail, you can always change that back. So being able to have those options this year, with being able to adjust the front skis, being able to adjust the rear trailing arm for more and less transfer. You also have the coupler blocks on the rear suspension that you can change from 1 to 4 for more transfer, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, like we all season, me and Mike have had our coupler block on the rear suspension at 1, which is the most amount of transfer. And I don't really think you would need to put it higher, because at the end of the day, because we have our trailing arm in the less transfer position, by having the coupler blocks on 1 for the most transfer, it kind of gives you the most enjoyable ride on the trail. And that's kind of what we've noticed. Yeah, so that's my review on this beast of a sled. Hands down the best sled I've ever had. Definitely a huge advantage, or a huge advance over my 18 XRS. And I can't wait for what's coming next. It's a secret, but all I can say is the Sled Addicts crew has 4 new machines coming next year. So stay tuned. If you liked that video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the Sled Addicts YouTube channel, where we release content on everything snowmobiles. Also, hit that bell icon so you can be updated every time we release new videos.